Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Child's Gallery Virtual Artist Talk on our exhibition, Interlaced, the Fabric of Art, featuring our moderator, Alexander Davis, who is the lead curator and driving force behind this exhibition, as well as one of our artists for the show. We're excited to welcome the artists here, and Alex will be introducing them as they speak. My name is Richard Baiano. I am president of Child's Gallery. The exhibition is currently on view until the 12th, which is tomorrow. We are open Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 6 p.m., Saturday and Sunday, 11 to 5 p.m. We are open to the public and welcome all. There will be a question and answer opportunity following the artist's talk. We ask that you submit questions via the question and answer or the chat feature during the presentation. So with that, Alex, I will turn this over to you to begin the talk.
Thank you, Richard. Hi, everybody. Am I present? Yeah. Hi, everybody. Like Richard said, my name is Alexander Davis. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns, and I'm really excited to be moderating this and to be joined by so many of the artists in this really exciting group show that we got to show at Child's Gallery. So I just want to point to this first image. This is a wonderful, maybe folks saw this in the window for a majority of the exhibit. It's no longer hanging, but it was an absolutely incredible applique piece by the artist Samuel Ojo. And it was a really cool, fun thing that we got to have in the window. And I think it's part of why so many people were drawn into the studio, into the gallery during this actual show. So we're really excited about that. So Interlaced, the Fabric of Art, is like I said, a group exhibition featuring several artists of different fiber and textile mediums. So the goal in the curation of the show was to bring together different types of textile art and show them and display them as art objects. So often these things can be viewed as functional, they can be viewed as craft, they can be viewed as historical, but something I'm really passionate about and interested in is asking folks to contextualize and view these works as fine art and finding the intersection where a high skill craft and high skill technique intersect with high skill and interesting art objects. Textiles and fibers really inherently deal with a lot of issues around domesticity, queerness, misogyny, ableism, classism. I feel like all of these things are inherently present in art, in craft, and in textile art in particular. So I think these themes are really present in the show, but what I was really interested in with this show was not leading with any of those themes, but instead bringing together a survey of high quality artists, high quality techniques, and asking the audience to take in these objects as fine art. So we're going to be talking about some of these pieces that you see here, but we rearranged the gallery a little bit, which was Richard's idea, which I love. We moved the seating area over to the middle of the gallery. It seems like a good decision. I'm enjoying it. So when you walk into the gallery, the first thing you see is this beautiful Pierre Fouché bobbin lace piece, along with one of Rodger Blum's wonderful quilts and Natalie Hayes Hammond's needle points. And then right above the seating area, you can see Christine Jablonski's weavings. Then tucked away in the corner, we'll get a better look at it in a minute, is Sedgwick Guth's self-portrait. We have a nice corner piece, this beautiful corner of Rodger's. So these are just installation shots. Here we have two shots. So one side next to the desk. If you're familiar with Child's Gallery, if you're looking straight ahead at the desk and you take a right, we have these works. And then tucked away in the alcove, some paintings by Jorge Pombo, a print by Alison Saar, and some other object works by Christine Jablonski. There we go. So first, I would love to introduce our first artist, who's going to be introducing himself and telling us about a couple of the works in the show, a dear friend and mentor and teacher of mine that I'm very proud to have here with us today. His name is Rodger Blum. So Rodger, if you want to unmute and talk a little bit about your work as how you came to quilting and the two pieces that, or the three pieces that we're showing today.
Thanks for reminding me to unmute. Hi, my name is Rodger Blum. I live and work in Western Mass, and I grew up and trained in North Carolina, but now I'm very happy to live in New England. This show is so exciting to me because, well, Richard and Alex have been working on it for over a year, and I've been talking with them for over a year about it. But it takes a moment to remind us that fabric is fundamental to our lives. Beyond the clothes that we wear, textiles, their patterns have always been signs and symbols for our phases of life, for status, for wealth, and for identification. Yet, as Alex mentioned, the fine art world has traditionally not recognized textiles as high art, relegating its expressive creation and manipulation to a lower status of craft. And I've always found this a little bit ironic because, to my mind, any good art comes from a solid foundation of craft and technique. Any important creative practice, no matter the artist's medium, is a reconciliation of expression, aesthetics, and studied practice. So I'm saying all that as a roundabout way of giving a shout out to Richard, Alex, and everyone at Child's Gallery for putting a show like this together in a private art gallery. It's a pretty brave and remarkable thing, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. So Richard's prompt for our mini talks this evening is what you make and why. And I think to talk about that briefly, I have to, I need everyone to know that the bulk of my life has been spent as a performing artist. I trained in dance at a young age, and I continue to choreograph and teach dance technique and theory. I love dance because it is a physical practice that concerns itself with the layering of ideas and gestures in time and space. That fundamental way of making predominates my work in textiles also. A quilt, at least the way I make a quilt, is a highly physical and often messy process. I usually work in very large formats. My tables downstairs are 4 by 8 feet, and I often put them together into a big 8 by 8 foot table. I dye, print, and discharge fabrics. Sometimes I cut it up and reconfigure it, and then it's dyed and discharged again. Those steps are several-day processes, which includes a heat batching and washing out at the end of each step. And the whole process can be repeated up to 20 and 30 times for each quilt. So the quilt that Alex is showing you right now, Event Horizon #1, is a large quilt, but it's actually made up of about 80 separate pieces that were dyed and then sewn together and then cut and sewn together. And then the entire thing, it's actually larger than my 2 work tables put together, were spread out, and I hand painted dye within the surface again and washed and then batched and did that several times. Can you go to the next slide, Alex? So these quilts are large also, but they're what we call whole cloth quilts. So these are single pieces of fabric that were dyed and manipulated over and over and over again, and then cropped and then sent to the quilter. And what you can't see, you can barely see here, but not really clearly, is these are all sent to what we call a long arm quilter. It's a big machine. It's about 12 feet long. And he puts it on the machine and runs the quilting lines in. I have a lot of trouble finding long arm quilters because I specify that the lines are hand drawn as opposed to computer generated or used or done with a grid. And so not many people want to do that. With some of these seams are like less than 1/8 of an inch apart. So it's a pretty labor intensive process. Saying all that, I think it's pretty clear that the concept of time is embedded in this work. Time is also embedded in the history of the work. And Alex was referring to the delineation that hopefully is going away a little bit between high art and low art. And so what you have in this history of craft and in quilts is a lineage of unnamed artists. And when I make a quilt, I'm referencing this incredible lineage of mostly women who've been making quilts and working with fibers and textiles as their sole means of expression for centuries and centuries. So slowly, these crafts are now being recognized as a fine art, but that art still proudly clings to its domestic roots as an object of necessity, comfort, and most importantly, as an expression of culture. In addition to choreography and my work in textiles at Such Child's Gallery, I also work with technology and create large-scale video installations that combine dance and hand-painted textiles. So it's a way of bringing the two aspects of my life together. I love technology and what it can do for the fine arts, but I always return to the haptic process and the physical practice. And under that, always is the rigor of good craft. In doing so, I try to make the quotidian profound and hope that it speaks. So my work as a visual artist is completely reflective of my work as a dance artist, and they feed each other constantly. Layers of time, process, and meaning. I moved to work like this because I believe I am, and I believe we all are, deeply layered human beings. So if my work has anything to say or leaves an after image with its audience, it's mostly a hope that this recognition of the deep layers that exist in all of us. And by understanding those layers, we can create a little bit more ease in coexisting in what is a very complex world. So thanks again for this opportunity. And I hope you can, if you haven't seen it, you've got a day to get to see the show.
You do.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Roger. I haven't told you this, but a colleague of ours who came in to see the show, one of the first things she said, who knows your choreography and was experiencing your textile work for the first time, said to me, "Oh my goodness, I understand his choreography so much better now." And I thought that was so interesting that she only knew your choreography and this was her first time experiencing your textiles. And then
Maybe I should hang the textiles in the lobby before the show and people will like get it.
I think it's all copacetic.
Okay.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
So thank you. I'd love to pass it over to Christine Jablonski. So Christine is a dear friend of the galleries and has been for many years. And we were so excited to finally have the opportunity and reason to show her beautiful work. So Christine, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for allowing us to display your work for the past few weeks.
Well, thanks for having me, and also congratulations and thanks to Richard and Alex for putting on this incredible show. We've been talking about it for a long time, and it's so exciting to see it come to fruition. And I also I'd like to thank Rodger for his introduction. I cannot underscore how important fabric and fiber have been to pretty much to the world since the beginning of time. Without cloth, we wouldn't have sails. Without sails, we would not have had ships. Without ships, we wouldn't have trading, and so forth and so forth and so on. So yeah, it sort of gets, I think this show, if nothing else, really kind of gets to really to the root of how we've evolved and where we've come from and where we're going. I am Christine Jablonski. I'm a weaver, and I came to weaving through knitting, actually, which Alex, I'm sure you'll appreciate. I had started weaving because I was looking for a way to use up what I felt was an obscenely large knitting stash of yarn that I hadn't used yet. It was not obscene. It was probably the size of about a drawer. And once I started weaving, discovered that fiber is kind of like a gas. It just expands to fill up all available space. And then like that happened, and that's only a small part of it. So for the last 10 years or so, I have been weaving primarily functional cloths, table linens, napkins, placemats, runners, kitchen towels, hand towels. And part of that's kind of a William Morris thing, I want to say, along the lines of have nothing in your home that you do not believe to be, functional or beautiful. Part of it is a bit of a love letter to my husband, who does all of the cooking in the household. So to be able to create something, a beautiful and durable tool, a towel for him to use is deeply gratifying for me. But it's also a bit of, my weaving is also a bit of an homage to my godmother, who I spent a lot of time with growing up, and who I think had a very European approach to life, in that she bought the best things she could afford, and she did not have an easy life, and she did not have a lot of money, but she bought the absolute best things she could afford and used it unapologetically and without guilt. And this was my first exposure to what seemed unbelievably luxurious at the time, was having a beautifully set table, no matter the occasion, and using cloth napkins at breakfast, no less. This to me was just sort of staggering. It was not the kind of environment that I had grown up in. And I think that that connection of cloth and home and family and values just kind of, it has just resonated with me ever since. You know, over the time that I have been weaving, and probably not long before Alex and Richard and I started talking about this show, I started thinking about my pieces in terms of their context and then taking them out of that context. So taking, you know, the placemats off the table and putting them on the wall, as we have here, you know, framing them with art. And just what that means, what changing that context means for those particular pieces, how people view them and value them. And I am still, however, a frugal Yankee at heart. And so when I am when I'm doing my work, I look to use up scraps, use everything that I have used from other projects. And this pair of pieces here was an example of that. And as I was laying out the palette for these two works, I kept thinking, I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. And Alex, if you could go to the next slide. The inspiration for this piece came from this painting, which is called Sewing, by Adam Grosowski, who's a painter out of the West Coast. And I had bought this painting about 30 years ago, and it was hanging in an upstairs bedroom. So I think just by living with art, it just kind of sort of infused my own weaving aesthetic. So this was a case of art on the wall influencing the weaving, which would then be framed as art on the wall. Alex, could you go to the next slide? This series at the dinner party, the aftermath, this came about after a couple of dinner parties where, when I was looking at the table after everyone had left, it struck me that everyone has a very particular signature of how they get up from the table, how they leave their place setting. Some people refold, some people crumple and just like toss and, you know, leave things on the table. Some people will kind of fidget and twist and ring with their napkins during dinner and then, you know, leave them. And so I made a series, and this was the full map. This is the full set of napkins, or the fullest. Made a set of these, and then in looking how people would play with them and leave them, I infused them with resin, each one of the pieces with resin, and then shaped or it formed them into the shapes that people would leave them at the table afterwards, after a meal. And what was so interesting was during the opening reception, was talking to people about these pieces, and everyone knew exactly which one they were, which dinner guest they are. Like, oh, I'm a folder. Nope, I'm a crumpler. No, I just ball it up and leave it. So to me, it was really fun to watch how people could, you know, connect. And there's a whole allegory there around connecting threads and weaving, et cetera, et cetera. But it was just fun to see this weaving in a more, I'll say, art with a capital A context, and see how people would interact with that and relate to it, when sometimes art can feel, you know, art with a capital A can feel a little bit distancing and harder to relate to. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks. And it's been one of my favorite questions to ask people as they come into the gallery. I'll tell them your thought process behind these 6 pieces, and I'll ask them who they are. And you're right, everybody immediately was like, oh, yep, I do that. I do. So it is this kind of very fun icebreaker, and then people have an inherent understanding of it. Thank you, Christine. Lovely. So Joan Hall is also joining us today. Joan is an artist that Child's Gallery has worked with for quite a while, and we're very honored to have been able to show for the first time a tapestry that she created. So Joan is going to talk to us a little bit about the source material and the process of the tapestry.
Thank you, Alex and Richard.
Thank you.
great to be in this group show with everybody. And most of you, since I'm new to New England, I had not known before. So it was very exciting for me. My relationship to fiber arts really is through the lens of handmade paper. I trained as a printmaker, and I found that paper was too flat, and I wanted it to have this sense of the tactility of fiber and fiber arts. And I found that handmade paper was that bridge between using a printed mark and having this sculptural presence that was more interesting for me than a single traditional sheet of paper. And I always wanted it, to be that it became an integral part of the work. It wasn't that it was a substrate that I worked on top of. So that's where I came from. I came to handmade paper through printmaking, because I thought of printmaking as a sculptural mark. So the original work, which is here, was called Catching a Miracle, or it's Catch a Miracle case. I can never remember the name. And it consists of multiple layers of translucent handmade paper that have been printed with collagraph and painted with paper pulp. And then this process allows me to both add and subtract. And to me, that was the most interesting thing with having paper that wasn't a rectangle, that wasn't a set flat, just one sheet in the back and then everything you layered on top. I always worked and thought in a collage method. And I think much like weavers weave many times, that it's this integral, interaction between the fibers and the materials, and a movement of going back and forth with what you're doing. So this particular piece was influenced by my interest in our bodies and our relationship to the ocean. And in it, I was envisioning my health and marine biology tangled up in a sea-swept net. So next. You change slides. Okay. So collaboration and experimentation have always been a really important part of my practice. And I don't just work with paper and print. I also have a real interest in steel and glass. And many times I usually combine steel with paper and paper with glass. It's coming out of that craft field and sculpture field. I'm sort of, I'm kind of straddling several different ways, if you want to try to pigeonhole me, which I don't particularly like. But the collaboration experimentation is what was exciting about this piece, because Don Farnsworth, who is the founder of Magnolia Editions, was starting back in 2006, 2007 to work with the Belgian tapestries. He now has his own machine, and he asked if I wanted to translate one of my pieces into a tapestry. And I was really intrigued by that idea to see how it would translate. And I think that was so interesting for me, that if you could see the original piece next to the tapestry, it's like the tapestry even picked up on the dimensionality of those orange lines and the net that was printed. I found that it was such an interesting process, and it's something that I would actually like to do more of, but I haven't. I've been doing other things. And so that's kind of why I make what I make. And then my main practice really is working with paper and making it very sculptural installations, one of which is behind me and in my studio here. But it all actually is my interest in initiating a conversation about, first it had to do with our bodies and our relationship to the ocean and the fact that we were killing the ocean. And now it's a process of being an interest in plastic pollution. And I guess you should go to the next slide, because you threw this. This was an addition here. So this particular piece, we're talking about, then paper as a sculptural element, I cast two different books. And one was The History of Art by Jansen, which I was taught with no women artists in it. So I thought it was the first book about misinformation. And the other book was a book of my late husband's, The History of Religious Art. And I think you have to have a certain step, a faith if you believe in religion. And he passed away, and these books are made out of my tearing up and making his cotton shirts into paper and embedding in it bits and pieces of his ties. And because of my interest in how we relate to the world, each of the books are covered with different types of sand that I've collected and detritus I've collected on beaches. because I feel like if we, well, I don't feel, if we lose the coral reefs, we lose we could actually lose sand. And I read an interesting article about that. So I think that's all I want to say.
Well, thank you, Joan. Can I plug your retrospective that's currently up in Weston right now at the River School?
Oh, sure.
If you're interested in seeing more of Joan's work, you can arrange for a showing at the River School in Weston, Massachusetts. You can reach out to us and we can help you do that. But Take Another Road to a Better Place is on view until February 14th. And it's a wonderful opportunity to see more sculptures like what's behind Joan right now, some large format pieces. I haven't gotten a chance to go yet, but I will be there and I'm really looking forward to seeing it before February 14th.
Thanks.
So thank you, Joan, for that. All right. Next, I'd love to introduce a friend of mine, Mr. Sedgwick Guth. This is our second time showing Sedgwick's work in the gallery. The first time we worked with Sedgwick was right after, or not after, that sounds, in the midst of reopening during COVID is how I guess I'll word that, in a show called Closet to Quarantine, which was a show of LGBTQ plus artists that we had developed relationships with through social media during lockdown, and working with and showing the work that they had been creating during lockdown. And since then, it's been really wonderful to continue to work with Sedgwick. So Sedgwick, thanks for coming back and doing another show with us.
Well, I mean, thank you for including me. Jeez.
Of course.
So the pieces in front of you right now, we talked earlier about like origin stories. So it's just like a little bit of a background of like what influences me visually, what's just part of my DNA as a creative. So to your right, I think it's like you see a hex sign, you see a book plate. Those are Pennsylvania Dutch typical visual decorative motifs, lots of symbolism. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, Lebanon County, so I'm a Pennsylvania Dutch boy. And people usually always, when they hear Pennsylvania Dutch, they're always thinking like the Amish, the Mennonites. Well, it's more of an umbrella term. And the Amish and the Mennonites are just a very small segment of that. And particularly, the Amish would not have any of this sort of decoration. So they don't have hex signs, they wouldn't have decorative book plates. But my family has been in Pennsylvania since the 1690s, and practitioners of making these sort of considered functional items, because say with the hex sign, there is mysticism tied into it, to bring good luck and to ward off evil spells and people and that sort. But to the left is a large triptych. This is very typical of my work now. I work pretty much primarily always heavyweight paper, mixed media. This I guess is more, I'm not sure if I would say a recent transition, but this piece right here, I created in 2019. And it's the first time that I used yarn or embroidery floss. I'd never knitted. I never did anything of that sort before. But my father passed away in February of 2019. And literally a week later, I started making this piece. I've always been an artist, a painter. I've glass blowing, printmaking, photography, the whole thing. And my degree is actually in film, but I've always been a storyteller and I come from a line of them. And so narrative is very important to me with any types of work. But so at that time, I was just processing a lot of grief. I was examining my relationship with my father, who I loved, but it was very, complex, which many of us experience with one or both of our parents. And so I was analyzing my relationships with other men, being a gay man, a queer artist. I was looking at my relationships with my father, with straight male friends, primarily with romantic relationships, though. My place in the world, dealing with like my own insecurities, what have you. So I just, and this was more of a, maybe I look at it now as kind of a gift from that period of grief, because I don't know that I would have done this. It was a way to get through what I was getting through. And I kept thinking, I know it might sound very simple and silly, but my grandmother had bought my brother and I both Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls, and when we were little. And there's also that too, like dolls with little boys, but she, from a different period, and that was like, it was like a toy, a plaything. And so I kept thinking about this Raggedy Andy doll, this candy heart, that sort of thing. So this center panel, this is based on kind of like the myth of Orion, and he's sort of my own version of Orion. And the heart in the center has a PrEP pill underneath it. And if you're familiar with like modern day medications in regards to HIV, that's something that you take daily. Or anyway, I'm not going to get into all that, but this is just kind of, so I started bringing some of these motifs of what I grew up around. So the hex sign, the book plate. I grew up around what are called fractors and tochines, which are like birth announcements, certificates, mourning embroideries, like when people passed away, and someone would like work tirelessly on like this beautiful embroidered piece, like with figures and text, also just samplers, things like that. So that's my long-winded of like how this all started. So we can go on to the next one. So this is a self-portrait. I actually took this reference photo in the very end of when we were in quarantine. I created during that period of time, I was very structured. During our quarantine, I was alone. And so every day I had a routine, and I spent probably a good 4 to 8 hours a day at least. I was working. And so I had taken this image, put it to the side, then started working on it a number of months later. So this has been in progress for a few years. And this is really taking some direct imagery from some fractors and things that I personally own now that are family items. But I flipped them a little bit because within my culture, it's like, well, within the Pennsylvania Dutch realm, a lot of that's based in heteronormative Christianity and customs, and there was never really a place for me to exist within that. So I have queered it up. So we have a hex sign that has poppers in it. I mean, just very simple little things. And throughout it, I usually embroider text too. It's I do writings. I'm always writing, and I just kind of like, they're little blurbs, and they're all over my studio. I'm in my studio right now, and there are times when it's just the right fit for something. And so there's a number of things in here, and there's actually some direct ties to some family practiced mysticism to ward off the bad stuff and to bring the good stuff, like there's little hex signs up above, and the doubling of the birds down below, those are called distal finks, and they're good luck charms. And so I'm not sure what else to say about this. I mean, it's like, it's again a work on paper. It's acrylic, embroidery with embroidery floss, stitching with yarn. So I have been going, I guess, the past few years, more of an identity crisis, because I always thought of myself as just a painter, not just a painter, but a painter. And now I realize that I'm definitely a mixed media person. So yeah. Okay. And yes, so the piece to the left, that would be one of my, maybe within like 6 months to a year after I created the triptych, when I started like fully embracing like the stitch work into what I was doing. I did a whole series of this size, of this scale. It's like there's probably 45 of them, because I'll get fixated on something and then I get obsessed. And probably one of my favorite things is to draw. And so then I will just start so many. And then I'm just like, ah, oh, hell, I have to finish all this. But so, and then to the right, the one I call the troubadour, that's very like heavily embellished. I have gold thread through that. There's acetate. There's acetate on the one to the left too. So I was playing with different I'm not sure what to say. It's just like graphic images. I was like pulling from some other, like, again, references of visual objects that I grew up around, and maybe simplifying them or altering them slightly. With the butterflies I was using a lot because of, and it's also like in other cultures a derogative term for gay people. And
Yes.
and now we have, we've taken a lot of those things, and we've turned them around to our advantage. And there's something really beautiful about, obviously butterflies are beautiful and the transformative power that they have. So that's in there. And this guy over here, he also has hex signs, and I really don't talk about it, but behind each of the hex signs, there are some handwritten items, including a little biography of this person because he's a real person. So anytime I use real life people in my work, including people that I've had romantic relationships with, and yeah, so.
Thank you. And there are just details and textures that need to be seen in person. So next time.
It's always frustrating, I think, to any artist when you take a photograph and it just does not translate the same way as seeing it in person. So
Of course.
yeah.
Thank you, Sedgwick. Beautiful. Oh God. Now, I made these and I have to talk about them. Uh, when we were putting this show together, Richard was very kind and insistent that I include some of my work in the show, and I was very hesitant and was hoping he'd forget that he asked me to do that, and he didn't forget, and in fact, he kept reminding me and gave me deadlines, and so I am really grateful for Richard and his guidance, and everyone else at the gallery for helping me put together what is the start of the Federation of Athletic Gentlemen Hall of Fame. So I am a knitter. I started knitting in 2009, and I started knitting and like most people, I learned knitting through other folks in my life. It was passed down to me from some very strong women in my life who were doing it, and I asked how they were doing it, and then I started sourcing from other people in my life who were knitters, and I was knitting like in class in high school, and I had a music teacher, and I would like run to her, and she'd fix my mistakes, and then I'd run back, and then I had another friend. So like there were just all these really wonderful, powerful women who had this knowledge and this craft in their bodies and helped pass it on to me. And it ended up being a really helpful tool for me. I have ADHD, and it created movement and allowed me to fidget in a productive way. My background is professionally in dance. I studied dance in college and in graduate school. So, but both of those schools were liberal arts schools, which I'm grateful for. I love my liberal arts education. But that means I had to take class for those who didn't go to a liberal arts school. I had to take classes in other things as well as the things I was studying, which is a beautiful part of any liberal arts program. So knitting really helped me get through my, required math class and science class and other classes as I was not dancing. So this particular project was inspired by some vintage photographs that I began collecting during lockdown. I became really interested in early male figure photography and beefcake photography, and particularly interested in this queer history of these objects, and specifically how early erotic images of men had to be presented in a covert way. So there were blue laws that made it illegal to mail erotic material and publish erotic material. So to work around that, these communities presented these images as physique photography, as athletic appreciation, as classic appreciation. You know, the men would be dressed as military appreciation, the men would be dressed as sailors or athletes, or they'd be dressed as Greek warriors and soldiers. And that's how they worked around these laws of mailing these objects around, and it's how queer men were able to celebrate and learn about each other and exchange pleasure and exchange, you know, these beautiful objects. And so building on that, I wanted to create like a cheeky kind of campy archive, mythological archive of the sports league that I imagined might have existed if these folks were actually athletes. So I collected the photos and I used the images to design the objects that I imagined they were wearing. So these are all my designs. And I would source the fiber. It's all undyed farm fiber. I would source the fiber from different farms and locations from around the world as I was traveling. So most of this singlet in the next piece is actually sourced from a farm in the UK, which is really exciting. So because the photos are in black and white, it became very possible to work with undyed natural fibers. So what that means is this is the color that the animal was, or in the case of this brown, it's a blend of a couple of animals to create that brown color, which was really fun and exciting to work with. I don't know why are lights like flashing behind me? Oh, well. Yeah, the light's flashing. Mark's fixing it. I'm sorry, everybody. So I was able to frame these objects, and then I gave each object a nameplate where I imagined the athlete who might have been in the photo and what event they were maybe participating in. So yeah, altogether, it's going to continue to grow and as a larger mythology. I'm writing a timeline for the organization of Federation of Athletic Gentlemen, the FAG, and figuring out how their history intertwines with World War II and the Olympics and Stonewall. And I'm having a really great time playing with these photos and playing with these knitted objects. A huge shout out to Amanda and the team at the Around the Corner Framing, who helped bring these to life. I was really thinking about the way that sports objects are framed in like pubs. You know, how you'll like go into a bar or like an Applebee's and there'll be like a framed jersey from somebody who nobody has anything to do with, but we elevate this object like it's like, oh, we're so proud of this random athlete who accomplished something, and this is what they wore when they accomplished it, and this is something we're deciding to archive, and this is a part of our history, and this is whatever. And I didn't get to experience that as a young gay boy. So I feel like this is my response to like all the framed football jerseys that were in my friends' basements, and you know, all the framed baseball bats that were in restaurants and stuff like that. This is my history. These are my people. These are the sports heroes of my life. So there are a couple other artists who weren't able to join us today, and I'd love to briefly talk about them if I'm not giving you all an epileptic seizure. Nope. Can you just shut it? Thank you. There we go. That works. These works are by an artist named Patrick Carroll. Patrick is lives and works in Los Angeles, California, and he comes actually from the world of historical studies. And his practices draw from many sources, but what he's doing is creating a poetic universe through his work that considers labor value, fantasy, grief, gender, and silhouette. I first became aware of his work through Instagram, and specifically, he was invited to do an installation with the designer J.W. Anderson as an opening to his Spring/Summer 23 and Women's Resort show in Milan, Italy. And he made wearables for that installation. And after that process, he continued to expand his practice. He has an MFA in fiction writing, and so all the words and language that are in his pieces are very particular, very specific. and are his words. And he says he takes inspiration from things as epic as the Bible and Shakespeare, and as pop culture oriented as Pokemon and Dolly Parton. And there's something so beautifully wonderful about the way he's using materials. These are machine knit, but if you haven't experienced machine knitting before, it's kind of a misnomer, because you might be using a machine, but it's a very hands-on physical process. It's not like you can press a button and walk away, it's not like he decides what it's going to look like and he prints it out like a laser jet printer. Patrick has to stand there and pass back and forth. So it's kind of like it's kind of weaving like, it's knitting and weaving like, and it's really its own practice, which is why I was excited to include someone who is using machine knitting in such a beautiful way. And the other artist who isn't here because it's 4 o'clock in the morning where he is Pierre Fouché. Pierre is a South African lace maker and artist, and we're really happy to have 2 of his works here. This work is called 06.642, or Temporal Consciousness Access. It's a giant piece that you probably see right when you walk into the gallery. It's about 16 feet in length and nearly 5 feet wide. And it's he took his inspiration from a very small piece of lace that he saw at an archive at the Met. He took a picture of it and he worked with it to expand it. And it's made out of macrame cord, but the actual piece is made in a bobbin lace technique. It's a really, really special and impactful thing if you haven't gotten a chance to see it in the gallery. And on the other side of that scale, we also are able to show his sampler 3x4, or the Burden of Excess. And this piece is interpreting a set of thread geometries that were discovered by an algorithm written by a Canadian computer scientist, mathematician, and lace maker named Veronica Irvine. So in conversation with Pierre, things that have come up for him are ideas of scale. So that this work came from a very small sample and he was able to make a very large thing. And this work came from a very large algorithm that is providing him with expansive possibilities, and the results are actually very small. We will be posting a separate interview with Pierre that we're really excited about. So be on the lookout for that if you want to learn more about Pierre and his work. He's much better at talking about it than I am. Natalie Hayes Hammond is also in the show. She's an artist that the gallery has shown many times before, but she was a scenic designer and a painter, but this is the first time that we believe her needlepoints have been shown in a gallery or a setting. They're absolutely like wild artifacts that she made, mostly inspired by images that she saw in archaeological magazines. So they range from a variety of cultures, a variety of astrological backgrounds. Some of them are like displaying myths, some of them are displaying star signs, but they're all really well documented. She was very specific and labeled them really well. So we have a book of these as well as lots of them. So these were really exciting to include. And we're really, they're really fun. Okay. Wow, Richard, please save me.
Yes.
I have nothing else to say.
Well, I just want to thank Alex for moderating that, because it's actually been quite an experience for me to come through it and experience the show from observing it rather than being a part of the planning of it. What I want to say, first of all, thank you all for your very insightful comments. And I feel like we've accomplished something that is very new to Child's Gallery. I will not be shy in saying that I had to be convinced to do this show because we don't have experience selling textiles. For those of you that know Child's Gallery, we've been around for a very long time, since 1937, and the gallery can have many faces at many times. But what's really interesting when I listen to all of you is it's still it's all art, but you know, it's still someone who's a sculptor, someone who's a printmaker, someone who's a painter. So it's just a different, um, way of making art. What I think is also something to be mentioned, and this really surprised me. This was an exhibition where we had more people that traveled from out of town to come see this than I can remember in a very long time. And it's because I feel like there is this sort of moment that's happening with fabric and textile art. And, you know, I don't know if this is true or not, but it was mentioned that after the 1919 flu pandemic, there was an interest in arts and crafts related to art, and that uh, because people were home and making things, that's what sort of became in the ether. And I think that there's a little of that now, but I will say that I think we've proved our thesis, which was uh, that this is not craft, this is art. And so with that,
Yeah.
I thank everyone. And we do have a couple questions that I'll put out there because I think that um, uh, gentleman MD has a question for both Rodger and Sedgwick. Um, and so the question is, do you plan in advance for what the final work will look like, or do you create it as you go? So basically, how intuitive is each of your processes?
Well, it's for both of us, but I'll just jump in here and say that I have for me personally, like there's things up here and I kind of have a general idea. I'm always like sketching little things down, terrible sketches, but like they're like little snapshots of something that's stuck. And without fail, when I start something, this is not uncommon, I'm sure, with many creatives. I know it's not. So I will start something, this idea, and then it just organically can shift and change over time. So, but I do some light mapping at first, and then
I think
things.
what's really interesting when you see Sedgwick's work up close is all of the decisions that need to be made in the placement of the embroidery, because they're decisions that I think, you know, are intuitive, and I think with Rodger's dying, that's apparent too when you sort of see it up close. And I believe, Rodger, you specifically call your dying an intuitive process. Is that correct?
It's an improvisational process. I wish one of my great teachers and mentors, Nancy Crow, who's a very famous quilter, is very insistent about planning and drafting, and she does black and white studies of everything and then tonal studies and works up to the final product. And I love her to death, but I just can't do that. And it's not how I choreograph either. I know how by now I know how things are going to go mostly. But dye always surprises you and discharge totally surprises you. And so you create problems for yourself, but creative problem solving is part of the joy of doing the work. And I sort of embrace that. But so I know where it's going to go for the most part, but I'm always mostly delightfully surprised.
So Christine, I think that would be very opposite for you, because if I'm correct, you have to do an immense amount of planning in order to create your patterns.
There is definitely a lot of pattern planning that happens, but it's also a lot of math and just planning out your yardages, because if you throw on a warp and then decide you want it, you there's a certain degree of latitude, you know, as you're going, but one of the worst feelings in the world is getting three-quarters of the way or two-thirds of the way or 7/8 of the way through a project and then running out of the yarn, the weft yarn that you need. Because as Rodger could attest to, I'm sure, like dye lots change, dye lots change, and things don't always match up. So there are so many inherent restrictions in weaving, right? There's an x-axis, there's a y-axis, there are things that you can play with, but only so far, right? So it's an interesting exercise to be working creatively within very strict parameters. So which includes a lot of planning.
Now, Joan, I think for you, it's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, I start out by making the paper, and it's I have to choose the fibers that I want to beat, and there's beating times to make things translucent if I'm doing more sculptural things. So there's all there's planning on how I make the pulps, and then I start intuitively making things when I combine the papers, and then when I print on the papers, that's another level, and then I go back and I paint on the paper, and then I start cutting. And the cutting in an odd way is sort of, I respond to the panels and just start intuitively cutting. And I find the hand cutting for me is very important, because there's sort of this intimacy that I develop with the piece, because a panel can take anywhere from 8 hours to a couple of days to cut, depending on how intricate it is.
So
They are hand cut.
Yes.
We were at an art fair, and somebody refused to believe that Joan's work was hand cut and looked Joan in the eye and told her, no, these are laser cut. There's nothing Joan could say to convince them otherwise.
Well, if you really look, nothing is the same. So, I mean,
Right.
to have to plan a laser cutter to do something like that, I would string myself up by a rope. I can't, I mean, I can't do that kind of planning. I was never a good printmaker, because good printmakers always plan their yellow, red, blue, black plates. And to me, that was such a bore, and I just couldn't handle it. So I wasn't very good at listening from the very beginning. But I liked that it was I liked that it was a sculptural mark. I didn't like to paint or draw.
So Alex, I don't know if you have your question screen up, but I'm going to let you answer this, because
Yeah.
you were sort of this was, I think, the first time you experienced in the gallery what it's like having an exhibition open to the public. And the question is, as this type of art is so different from what Child's Gallery usually shows, what were the reactions of the public, visitors, media, and how accepting of these creations as art?
That's a really great question. I will say that folks, Richard already said this, but folks traveled to see this work, and there's something about textile arts and fiber arts that when someone who also engages in that technique sees something, they get excited. And when they have somebody to talk about it with, they get excited. It's like when you meet somebody and immediately you have a similar niche interest, whether that's weaving or embroidery or knitting or quilting, people they light up and they're really eager to engage and talk about it. So we had a lot of folks who identify as makers come into the show and really wanted to kind of geek out about other people's processes. And I had a great time doing that. Folks who were knitters or quilters, and that was really fun. Also, I think, I don't know, museums were really interested in this show. We had a lot of other curators and other museum folks who wanted to come in and take a look at this. There's definitely a trend. There's definitely a trendy moment happening. And so it was really exciting to be able to see that these institutionally minded folks are looking at this work and excited about working and seeing this kind of work. But yeah, I don't know if it's just like the context of a white wall gallery, but like nobody was like, oh, you call this art? Like I didn't get that.
What I would add to that is I wouldn't hesitate to do another show of this again. And
Yeah.
I think it certainly answered that question for me. Sedgwick, we have a question specifically for you from
Ooh.
Steve. He says he loves your work and he really appreciates you sharing the source from moving the source for moving from being a painter to using your mixed media was one of grief. And he said that he asked, do you find any of the other men appear in more than one work, or are they limited to one piece each?
Oh,
Ooh.
oh, I mean, there's some repeats. Well, it just depends. So these are two unfinished pieces. I'm working on them right now. I'm in my studio. I have a system where I hang them from the wall because after I paint kind of like a foundation and I'm stitching. And so anyway, so the one in the white tank top, the blue, that's Tommy, a friend of mine. He's also the center panel from the talk earlier, like when I was introduced the large triptych, he is the center panel. So I've certain people I have used repeatedly, and sometimes it's once and done. And there are subjects where I have just created them. They don't necessarily exist as like quote unquote real people. So
And was that your first self-portrait? Am I incorrect? Or you don't often do self-portraits?
I don't, and in regards to like my aesthetic now, what I'm doing now, that's the first one it's the only one I've done. So
Interesting.
yeah, I'm doing another one though.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
we are at 7:05.
we did it, everybody.
So with that, I would like to thank all of you for the talk, but in particular, all of you for participating in a show that the gallery is very proud of, and we're grateful for all of you for participating. Thank you,
And
Alex,
yeah.
for putting it together and being the driving force that you are.
Yeah,
Thank you. And of course, thank you to Richard and I get to be the mouthpiece of this talk. But of course, thank you to Stephanie and Julie and Catherine and Yvonne and our whole Child's Gallery family who make the lights turn on. So we're really grateful. And, you know, this was a team effort. So thank you to all of the artists, all the folks at Child's, and all the folks watching. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You'll see this on YouTube.